Please subscribe to hear more Cryptid Tales. If you like the story you heard, give us a thumbs up and feel free to leave us a comment. If you'd like to hear your own cryptid encounter on Cryptid Tales, send us an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com. My name is Dave, and I'm 58 years old. I have been hunting since I was 11. Back then, I would go hunting with my dad and grandfather. We lived in New Jersey, and my dad had property in Vernon Valley, next to the New York state line. We had hunted there many times, and oftentimes would see black bear and lots of white-tailed deer. It was early December, and I was in my early 20s at the time. Normally, I always hunted with my friend Dimitri, but this time I went alone because Dimitri had to work. I walked in on the same trail I always took when I hunted there and found my spot up against a cliff overlooking a valley. The deer would usually cross through this area, and I had taken a big 8-pointer at this very same spot previously. It was about 7:30 in the morning when I heard a loud noise coming from my right. 5 does came running hard down the hillside. I got ready, anticipating that a big buck was chasing them. But what I saw was no deer. A big man-looking thing, all black in color, was following right behind them. I had a 20-gauge shotgun in my hands, but I was frozen with fear as I watched this thing on 2 legs running after the deer. I tried to snap out of it, this frozen state I was in, so I could get out of there. Before I could compose myself, the thing suddenly stopped and looked up the hill directly at me. It had ducked behind a big tree, but I could still see its huge shoulder and the side of its face as it peeked out from around the trunk. It never stopped staring right at me, and I could feel its gaze burn into me. I had never been so scared in my life. I regained my composure enough to slowly start walking backwards, never taking my eyes off the thing behind the tree, and making my way back down the trail. I did this until I couldn't see the thing anymore, and then I turned and ran like hell. I ran as fast and hard as my legs would take me, all the way out of the woods and back to my Jeep at the trailhead. It felt like it took forever to get back to my vehicle, and I was completely out of air by the time I got there. In my haste to leave, I had left my brand new backpack behind, but I didn't even care. I was alive, and that was all I was concerned with. That, and putting as much distance between myself and that thing as I could. Whatever that thing was, I can assure you it was no bear, and it was not a man. After years of seeing different shows on television and hearing podcasts about Bigfoot on the internet, I am certain that's exactly what I saw. I never went back there after that encounter, but as I am writing this, I can still see the thing in my head clear as day. It's still hard to believe that they are really out there. If I hadn't seen it with my own 2 eyes, I probably wouldn't believe it to this very day. But I will say this: never go into the woods unarmed. You never know when something like this could happen to you. I would like to share an occurrence with you that I've not shared with any other online forum or anyone else aside from a few family members. This was back in fall of 2007, and I was living in Southern California. I was born and raised in Orange County, and that's where I lived with my wife and 3 kids. We used to frequent Las Vegas at least once a month, making the trip in just under 4 hours from where we lived. I was always the designated driver, and my wife and kids would usually fall asleep on the way back home. It was about 11 p.m. on our way home one night, and we were just entering Apple Valley, California on the 15 South. I noticed an individual, a male, standing on the right side of the freeway. The man had long hair and was very muscular from what I could tell from that distance. I just assumed he was a hitchhiker, until he made a sudden dash towards the middle of the freeway. I'm being completely honest when I tell you that I have excellent vision, stronger than 20/20, and I was wide awake when this happened. I watched in amazement as this man darted across 3 lanes of traffic, with cars speeding towards him at more than 75 miles per hour to the concrete embankment of the freeway. When he began running, his movements changed, and it was like he shifted from a physical form into that of a shadow, and then reappeared on the concrete. This is when I got a clear look at this individual, as clear as I could going 75 miles per hour in the middle lane. When he jumped onto the middle concrete wall, he was facing my direction, and I got a good look at him. His hair was long, hanging down his back. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and had a very muscular physique. I could also see that his body was covered with thin fur, thin enough that I could make out his muscles through it. He darted again across the opposite lanes, and I never saw him again. In all the trips before and after that I made to Vegas along that same route, I never saw him or anything like him ever again. I am sure you received a lot of emails about this subject, but I can tell you that I saw this man, or whatever he was, with clear sight. It was amazing the way he moved, and I am positive he somehow skipped forward, and when he did, he was not normal. I've experienced several things at my home where I have lived for about 16 years now. You can usually even feel this sort of negative energy that seems to be concentrated near the wooded areas of our property. It's often this uneasy feeling you get, or the feeling like you're being watched. One of those things you really have to experience to understand. My first experience was when we had a friend over while we were younger. We decided to put up a tent and camp outside in the great outdoors. I woke up to a strange feeling. I sat up and looked around, but everyone else was still asleep. As I sat there, I started hearing footsteps. Bipedal footsteps, like a person walking around outside our tent. The steps got louder and closer until whatever it was right outside the tent. I watched as the tent wall slowly pressed inward right by my shoulder. I couldn't move, I was so scared. You could hear the sound of the tent fabric as it rubbed against it, and I could make out the slight impression of what looked like a hand pressing against the wall. The yard was surrounded by a fence that was at least 7 feet tall, so I don't really think a person would have made it over without making any noise. But this thing, whatever it was completely quiet. Shortly after that, the thing left. I laid back down, halfway in a state of shock, but hoping that maybe someone else in the tent had heard it too. The next morning I questioned everyone, but no one else had heard anything. They all said I must have been imagining things, so I dropped it. The second thing I experienced was when me and my brother were getting our dogs inside for the night. The only light in our yard was from spotlights, so there was a fair amount of darkness that you just couldn't see into when they were on at night. We were calling our labs when we caught a glimpse of something moving very fast just inside the darkness. It was moving so fast that my eyes could barely keep up with the movement, But what I did see, I don't really have an explanation for it. It was so quick that it was almost like a shadow, but the few details I could make out was like nothing I've ever seen before or since. The thing looked like a female deer, only taller with longer legs than a deer, and a short tail almost like a rabbit would have. These really long whisker-looking things, and these pointed ears that were folded back over its head. Keep in mind, our total property is close to 5 acres. This thing jumped a fence and dashed by me and my brother in no time at all, just a blink of an eye, and made its way into the trees. It must have covered at least 300 feet or more. The next strange thing I remember witnessing was when my brother and I were about to go to sleep one night. I heard these strange sounds that I can only compare to the sounds a puppy might make, along with the sounds of people riding ATVs and cheering in the woods. I know that sounds really strange, but the sounds were really strange, and that's the best way I can describe it. When I asked my brother if he was hearing the same sounds I was, a rock hit the window, causing me to jump. We both got quiet and looked at one another, and as soon as I started to ask if he had heard it too, another rock hit the window again. We both ran outside expecting to find someone we knew, but no one and nothing was there. My fourth weird experience was again at night, right as I was laying down for bed. It was summer, and it was a nice cool night, so I had my window open. As I laid there listening to the hypnotic sound of crickets and tree frogs, everything went suddenly quiet. My ears strained at the sudden silence, and that's when I heard the sound of footsteps, crunching the gravel with each step, and those same strange puppy-like noises I had heard before. As I laid there, resisting the urge to look outside, afraid of what I might see, the puppy noises slowly turned into the sound I described before, like a group of people cheering. I jumped up and slammed my window shut, locking it and shutting the blinds before returning to the safety of the bed. The next thing I encountered was by far the worst, and I'll never be able to forget it. We all had left town on a family vacation and left a friend of the family in charge of watching and feeding our animals while we were gone. We were about halfway to our destination and had stopped at a motel for the night. That night, I had a nightmare, a horrible and vivid dream. In the dream, I was standing in our curved driveway at home. It was at nighttime, and I was alone. I remember looking down at my feet, and there, on the ground, crawling towards me, was one of our old dogs. It looked like it was torn in half, and was leaving a trail of blood as it pulled itself across the ground. Once the dog had reached me, it laid its head on my foot and drew its last breath. In the dream, I looked back up, away from the horrible sight, and there, standing in front of me, was a figure in the darkness, with bright yellow eyes and a large wicked grin. The thing just stood there staring at me, grinning. I felt absolute anger and rage flood over me, and my body began to glow brightly, lighting up the night. The creature turned and ran off into the woods. I suddenly woke up, soaking with sweat, and fighting the urge to scream. I calmed myself down and told myself that it was only a nightmare, just a bad dream. When we finally got back home, the dream was far out of my mind, but it didn't take long for that same feeling of terror to sink in. Our animals weren't around. We went looking, and to our horror, we found 6 of them dead. How did 6 animals die in the span of a week? We found some of the dogs that were missing. Well, we found what was left of them. Our front door was standing wide open, but there weren't any signs of thieves or any sort of predators, like no blood, no claw marks, nothing. Just a few small patches of hair where one of our poor animals had been snatched up. Whatever did it must have been powerful and extremely fast. It had to get over 2 very tall, almost 9-foot tall fences. Luckily, our other little dogs were safe, but had been hiding under whatever they could find. We also found one of our roosters had been torn in half, suffering the same fate as the other little dogs. Our black lab was alive, but we watched helplessly as it died from an uncontrollable seizure. Then, something happened that made me feel like I was punched directly in my stomach. We found the old dog that I had the dream about. We only found her upper half. Her lower half was nowhere to be seen. There was no blood, no organs, just a dried up husk of what was once my dog. Over the next few years, the surviving dogs all died of seizures. The last event I experienced happened when I was home all by myself. In fact, I was using the restroom at the time. It was just after noon on a bright summer day. The rest of my family were all getting groceries, but I didn't want to go. While I was in the restroom, I heard the sound of someone coming up the metal spiral staircase. The dog started barking, and I heard what sounded like my mother call out to them, "Hey guys." I swear to this day it sounded just like my mother. I even heard the sound of the metal doggy gate open and close. After I was done using the restroom, I came out expecting to see my family, but no one was there. Kind of disorientated by the whole thing, I called my mom's cell phone, only to find out they were still all at the grocery store. Those are all the experiences I've had so far, but if I have something else happen, I'll be sure to let you know. I don't know if the events are paranormal or cryptid or what, but something strange is definitely out there.